I'm wondering actually if the video settings I have is not. No, I have enabled HD. Interesting.
I don't mind if you go low def.
Yeah, yeah, same. I'm getting to that point where I really want non-HD things. A lot of
Yeah. I've been looking for
blurry.
cameras that would specifically give me that, and I haven't found any.
Just got to look for old cameras.
Yeah,
That's all.
yeah, exactly.
Well, we have some people waiting to probably
Yeah,
participate in the question answer part.
that'd be great.
Yeah, let's just
And I mean, feel free, even as we're going, if you want to, it's up to you.
yeah. I mean, we'll see how it shapes up, but obviously there's a lot of subjects to cover. The history of Event Store, your background, which is quite interesting. Obviously,
Well, that could take a long time.
that's okay. We have, if you have time, we have 2 hours, but we can
Okay.
cut it short whenever you want.
Okay.
As long as we give some time for people to ask questions at the end, I guess 15 minutes or so. If we don't have that, so I think we're live. Let's just see if YouTube has announced this. I always triple check now because, oh yeah, looks like we are live. Yeah, great, awesome.
Yeah, you're live in YouTube for sure.
Thanks, Yurdis. Cool. I'm glad Yurdis made it. He was missing our latest events all the time. Now he got in sync again.
I hate the meetups do not allow me to say, look, yes, I want to subscribe to every single event. Just add it to my calendar. Don't force me to ask, like, reserve RB and then add it to my calendar. Like, yes, I think it want them all.
Be, you know why that might be a problem, Yurdis, is because I split the meetup to be, it was 2 times a week, and now it's 1 time a week, but the podcast is the other one that got transformed. So it's kind of like a different meetup series. And so even if you had that added to your calendar, it probably skipped the new one, the podcast one. So, but there's a lot of history to talk about. In fact, the whole name of this is the Event Driven Podcast, the Event Driven Meetup. That's all you're doing, Dave.
Oh yeah, I mean, that would be interesting to talk about how that came up. That will
because that was quite a while ago now. Was it just 3 years ago? If
it was. Yeah. And a little more than 2 years ago, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I guess we're ready kind of to start. People will pop in. I'm going to try and keep my eye on the chat in YouTube.
Oh, that's good.
People are just listening on YouTube. They can pop in a question, and I'll try to get to it, and at least write them down to ask you about those things as they come up.
Sounds good. I'm looking.
I never know about this chat thing, whether I disabled the chat box or not. They have this little thing that crosses it out. Okay. Can they say hi?
Looks like Eves is saying it's not disabled.
No, I mean when I have it on my phone and I look at it, there's a little icon to say, hey, say hello or whatever, or hide the chat or not.
Yeah.
And it's tough to tell whether it's toggled on or off, but hopefully, if Yurdis finds a comment there, maybe he can help. I'll make you guys co-hosts just in case there's a problem and we don't, I have a technical problem, an internet problem.
I can watch the YouTube comments as well. And then should we reserve that until the end?
I'll make you a co-host. Hey?
Should we hold all the comments, so responding to the comments towards the end, right?
Well, it depends. I mean, if we're in kind of like a segue, we can probably interject a question if it's on topic of what was just talked about. But if it's kind of out of left field, we can probably bunch them up and then have them answered in order of importance or relevance or whatever at the end. So again, thank you, Dave, for making the time. So let's get started. What
do this.
should we start off with? There's so much to talk about. We kind of already mentioned the start of this event-driven meetup, now event-driven
Yeah.
podcast. That's really your doing. But let's hear about everything that led up to that point in terms of how you got started in the industry. It's always interesting to
Okay.
find people's personal take on their careers and their passions. So
Sure,
super
sure.
happy to hear your background.
I'd be glad to do that. I mean,
Yeah.
I just turned 60 years old, so and
Wow,
I've been in
good.
tech. I've been, that's why I try to hide. That's why staying away from
You didn't.
HD
You're
cameras.
kidding.
Yeah. No.
You're
it's,
kidding.
no.
Really?
No.
No, I thought
Yeah,
I generally thought you were joking.
No. I turned 60
Wow.
in December, and
Holy
I've been in
smokes.
tech. I've been in tech pretty much my whole career. I mean, there's some story of working in a recording studio in Hollywood, but then, which is a whole story. I won't tell it. But really, the way things started with me was as a developer and then architect, and I ended up going to doing that for years and doing DB2 relational database type work, and I ended up working for IBM in the relational days when relational was actually just coming out. And it actually does remind me of some of the things that's going on right now with event store type databases. Some of the similar kind of explanations to CTOs and CEOs about why event stores should be interesting to them remind me of some of the conversations I was having when I was with IBM with CTOs and CIOs around why relational database was valuable to them. Because at that time, it was hierarchical databases. And so you had to really, IMS, what was it called? IMS DC DB, which no one's heard of probably on this.
I couldn't help you with that.
But it was a hierarchical database. And at the time, the big thing that relational database brought was if business requirements changed, you might need to query data in ways you didn't anticipate when you built the systems. And this was one of a lot of times CIOs and CTOs, and I'm one of these in the past, are fear-based decision makers. So the idea that you were not going to be able to do something in the future was very compelling and was a lot of what drove relational database adoption at that time, which, believe it or not, was leading edge. As we see with lots of things now, what's now normal was leading edge then. So that was with IBM. I became a CIO after that at an insurance company, large insurance company based called PEMCO, for a few years, and really didn't like the CIO work at all, and ended up moving over to an interesting job in Seattle, around the Seattle area, was Bill Gates' image company. So I was director of technology for Corbis, which was his image and house technology company. At the time, it was the largest digital archive of imagery in the world. Getty hadn't even really gotten into digital imagery. And we were in Wired Magazine, and we were doing a bunch of really interesting leading edge stuff. I do have to say it was like the most stressful job I ever had in my life. 2 years of working directly for Bill Gates for a lot of things, and
wow.
But I learned a lot. And I ended up at the time that was the .com boom was just kicking off, and Bill didn't ever want to do anything, go public with his shares. There was, interestingly enough, all these people at Microsoft were making tons of money, but at Corbis there wasn't really that opportunity. So I ended up joining a startup that was doing dollar-based investing called ShareBuilder. And actually at that time, that was the first company that ever did dollar-based investing. Those of you who can go to Robinhood now and buy $100 worth of a stock, that didn't exist then. I was a part of the patent that we patented that originally. Not sure that's really patentable, but at the time you could patent anything. And that's what ShareBuilder did, electronic brokerage. And then I left ShareBuilder and went to GeoTrust. I was a co-founder and employee of GeoTrust. It became the second largest certificate authority behind VeriSign, and then was acquired by VeriSign. And that was an interesting, there was a lot more to that story as well, because it was through the .com bubble bursting and then coming out on the other side as a certificate authority successfully. So then we had moved to the East Coast, GeoTrust had moved to the East Coast and sort of closed down its West Coast, and we wanted to stay on the West Coast. We're Pacific Northwest people, my family is, and as you are, Adam, but in a different country. So I ended up going into the more tech companies. I was at BEA, I worked for BEA and got into the Java space. I worked on several the JCP process. I got to see that making sausage, not a great process, really, the JCP process at the time, but was also a part of an open source project there called XML Beans, which was, I think, either the first or one of the very early BEA open source projects, and when they really started to get into open source. And when BEA decided to close its Northwest offices, and so I finally ended up, after Microsoft, not going to Microsoft for a very long time, I ended up going to Microsoft as GPM of the XML team, which I apologize.
Interesting that you worked for Bill Gates, but this is the first time you're working for Microsoft.
Yes, and I was way below Bill Gates at this point, and but I was GPM of the XML team in the go-go period of XML, really. So I apologize to a lot of people for some of the things I was responsible for. There were some very interesting and good things that happened. One of the things about the XML team at Microsoft was that although it was in the database division, so it worked for SQL Server, it also had bits that shipped in Windows and also in the dev division in .NET. So I was involved with all of the divisions. I was in that stage where I worked with Anders and Eric Meyer and other really strong folks on Link. I was one of the co-inventors of Link to XML, or I'm listed on it. I participated. I sat in the room.
Yeah, I think I remember using the XSLT libraries in .NET. That was all your work. Interesting.
That was my team's work. It was a fairly large team.
Right.
I did work hands-on on Link to XML, and that was a fantastic project. And really, the Link at Microsoft, I felt, was one of the most successful projects. Roslyn as well, which I ended up working on as also. I ended up leaving the XML team, doing a startup in Hawaii that didn't go. It was gamification of white label gamification. It actually didn't go that far, and came back to Microsoft. But I got involved with Ruby then, and came back to Microsoft and was a leader on the Ruby and Python, Iron Ruby and Iron Python teams, and which was a really cool. That was open source as well. So open source. It was Ruby when you couldn't run Ruby on Windows. So our development team were all running Macs and had iPhones when the Windows Phone was popular. And as a matter of fact, there's a rumor that one of the developers on that team had an iPhone, and Ballmer was walking through and picked up his iPhone. This is when he was trying to promote the Windows Phone, and accidentally dropped it and broke it. And accidentally. And my understanding, it was accidentally. However, what happened was it got out that Ballmer was breaking iPhones and
I seem to recall a story like that, so that's just a rumor.
Yeah, I believe, I'm claiming that was an accident.
Okay.
But Iron Ruby and Iron Python, in particular Iron Python, got popular enough that at that time, if you're at Microsoft, if you were creating confusion for the customer, that was the kiss of death for your project, really. And they decided that they would give Iron Python and Iron Ruby back to the community. Because really at Microsoft at the time, C# was the language. Even with all of the innovation that was going on, there was a ton of innovation going on at Microsoft around the DLR, around Iron Python, around Iron Ruby.
Yeah, everything was cross-compiling down to IL.
Yeah, and the CLR was built for multi-language.
Right?
Yeah, the CLR was built for multi-language in the first place. I find it ironic that Microsoft has moved more and more towards C#, and C# is a great language in my view. It's innovative and it moves at a speed that most other languages haven't been able to move at.
Some of the auto property things that they're doing, or record types or whatever lately. And what is it, version 9 now? What is it? I forget.
I actually am not sure either. but I mean, for me, my time there was with Link. Link was very innovative when you have async.
That was really good.
The early async work. All of that, and I think the designers Anders and Mads Torgersen and Eric Lippert and Matt Warren, the guys on that team are unparalleled in my view. But there's probably others just equally as talented, but they are amazingly talented. And actually, so what happened then was I had the opportunity. They sent those projects back to the community, and I had a chance to figure out what I wanted to do. And I had a chance to get on the Roslyn project. I think I was maybe the third or fourth person on the Roslyn project, which was rewriting C# into C#. There was a lot that went into that, a lot of learnings. And I spent about a year as a developer and kind of doing hands-on development in Roslyn, and kind of started to miss the CTO role and the leadership role. and went out and joined a company called Line Data. It was actually a company called Capital Stream, which was in Seattle, a startup in Seattle doing loan origination. It was almost immediately acquired by Line Data. This is going to lead to Event Store because
this is the part of history I'm a little more familiar with.
Yeah, this is where we start to intersect a bit. It started as I was a CTO of the division out in the Northwest, doing loan origination, and then I ended up in the global CTO role on the loan origination side, and was located in Paris for a while, and then came back and took over the asset management, moved over to the larger part of the business, which was the asset management part.
That's right. I forgot you lived in Paris for a bit.
Yeah, I lived in Paris for a year, and I don't know French. And so it was kind of a shit show, frankly. But I got through it, and I would never trade it. But and it wasn't the culture of Paris or living in Paris that was difficult. It was the business environment. The business environment is substantially different than what you're used to in either the UK or the US. And that's a whole discussion. I see York.
I worked at Pay by Phone, where we had to, one of our implementations was in, cities in France, and definitely different pace, different workflows, let's just say.
Even the way meetings work, really fundamental things, the way projects work, varied substantially. But I ended up coming back and moving to Boston and taking over the front office asset management, and then later the middle office asset management, and then finally all of the asset management division, which we don't have to go into right this second, but that's what led to this. Actually we'll do. It'll probably be a nice way to talk about how I got involved with event sourcing, and that was we had in that role. I had never heard of event sourcing at all. How I missed that, what I view as one of the most important trends going on in the industry. And this is 2017, by the way, roughly 2017 timeframe. I kind of thought I'd seen it all. I'd been doing a lot of things in the industry, and I had not intersected with these trends or these ideas. And I was called to Paris right after I got promoted. I was called to Paris, and they said, "We want you to take on an ambitious project, the most ambitious project this company has ever done. We have these systems across the back office, the middle office, the front office. They do a lot of the same things. You have trading, you have portfolio management, you have risk, you have accounting, you have all these, and they exist in all of these systems that have grown via acquisition over time. We need a strategy. We want to, some of them are older, some of them are newer, to improve them and get the best of breed together. And we really mean it." And I didn't believe they meant it. I went back and proposed some minor things, and they came back and said, "No, we really mean it." But a bit of the challenge for me was that I really did not have a solution in mind. I could not even, anything that I would possibly even reason about hypothetically to address this issue. And one of our architects there, a guy named Steve Drew, who had Googled about event sourcing and read about it and knew about Greg and others in the industry, said, "We might be able to take on an event sourcing, a particular use case of event sourcing to help address this problem." And that was particularly this idea of isolating a part of a domain, isolating a domain or a service, and moving it out of an existing system, then redirecting commands to that, and then feeding that back to the prior system, the legacy system, as a first-class read model, and allowing you to sort of, with the strangulation pattern, start to move these things out and move your technology forward. So at least it was still hard to imagine that we could do it, but at least it was a strategy. And so I went to the board. One other part of this is, as I was Googling, I found Kafka, and Confluent was the obvious solution to me. And so at the point, and this is really a dork CTO hat on, really, I have to admit, because it was, oh, look, Confluent, they're out of LinkedIn. I put at the very top architectural diagram that Kafka would be a key part of this architecture. I met with the CTO of Confluent, Neha, and talked to her about what we were doing. And I was all in on Confluent. So we got the check, they wrote the check, the largest project that Line Data had ever taken on, which is more power to them. I think it's a pretty incredible thing, this adopting this approach. And I went out and said, well, we have to hire someone who's really done this before. And so we put out the request, and we got back Chris Condren, who you and the community probably may know, because I know we've spoken at times. And Chris goes back with Greg and some of the earliest customers of Event Store, and he became a member of the team at Line Data as an architect, and proceeded to argue with me for 6 weeks about why Kafka was not going to do the job.
Yeah.
And
he's because of you, I think he's become an expert on that subject.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Because I was just dead set that, I had put reputation on the line, and it was, what do you mean? This is out of LinkedIn. And they had articles on event sourcing that, it wasn't until really we got into the coding patterns and the sort of the requirements that we can talk about at some point around what's necessary for a database technology, especially an event source, purpose-built event source technology versus really a durable messaging technology, of which Kafka is very powerful at. So we ended up changing from making the decision to move from Confluent and Kafka to Event Store DB. And I ended up involving Greg and many of the folks who are now on the team from in a consulting capacity to do a lot of work there. And one of the things that crossed my mind right away when I had made this decision to move from, we still had Kafka in the plan, but really from a $1.5 billion valuation business to Event Store, which was still a very small business, there's an opportunity here. And probably within a few months, I had talked with Chris Watt, and Chris Watt is one of the investors, along with Greg, about, what do you want to do with this business? Are you interested in growing it? There's a really big opportunity here, in my opinion. And those planted seeds, not really much came out of it during that timeframe. And I spent we continued to work on that project. And I ended up going on sabbatical, leaving Line Data, going sabbatical and moving back to Seattle. And at that point, I became available. And Chris Watt offered me the role. This is in January of 2019, the role as CEO at Event Store. And so that's what I've been doing since 2019, has been working on Event Store.
But in that time, I think just before you started the event-driven meetup in Seattle.
It was actually just after that.
Oh, just after that. Okay,
yeah,
so it's still correct timeline-wise.
Yeah, and I can tell you how that there's a very specific thing that led to that, and it comes from a briefing we did fairly early. Chris Condren and James Nugent and I did a briefing on event source systems, but really it was about Event Store DB. But we had to talk about. Of course, you can't talk about Event Store DB without talking about event sourcing and the importance of it. And we had seen, there's a Gartner analyst. I don't know if you know him. His name's Yefim. I think it's Yefim Naffer is his name, and he's the lead Gartner analyst for event-driven architecture. And we had seen a talk from him, and he has he's very good diagrams and good information about event-driven architecture, but it stopped at the edge of the system, really. Event-driven architecture was really talking about events as they proceeded out the boundaries of the system and out into the enterprise, and a lot of valuable things. In some ways, though, an evolution of enterprise service bus thinking into instead choreography and reactivity versus what you were seeing with enterprise service buses. So we came in and gave a discussion to them around the fractal nature of an event-driven architecture, that it actually needed to also be event-driven within the systems, within the services, and that there were these reasons why that would be beneficial. And
like accountability, traceability, audit, right?
Exactly. We have
replay.
Matter of fact, there was a member of the event-driven that I won't talk about the company, that was trying to do essentially event sourcing, trying to do event sourcing at the kind of EDA level, but not at the systems level. And they would talk about the problems they ran into, and they were, well, we found a problem in this downstream system. How do we know what happened? But you go to the source system and it's completely forgotten all of that. There is no way to know what happened. And
source of truth went missing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so this led to this idea that we needed the event sourcing community was, and it's improving, but it's still true. The event sourcing community and and the EDA community are so divided. And that they really should be a part of the same thing. They should be a part of there's a spectrum and different parts of the puzzle.
Yeah, they're incredibly powerful together. It's definitely each one is weaker without the other, for sure.
Exactly. And that's where, what I wanted to do with we had the Seattle Event-Driven Meetup, and I know you switched over to the Event-Driven Meetup name, and with the Boston Event-Driven Meetup and the London Event-Driven Meetup, is to try to get folks from all areas doing event-driven type of work to start to talk to each other more. Yeah. And really, you've been doing great work with that, Adam, continuing that.
Well, thanks. It's a tireless, thankless task that I
Yeah.
take on twice a week. But hopefully it's helping. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
then, so that brings us up to date. So you end up at 2019. You end up in the CEO position
Yes.
at Event Store.
Yeah.
So this is more about what is now. Maybe
Yeah.
another topic to really talk about is the focus of Event Store, the name Event Store versus Event Store DB, the importance of that,
Yeah.
the goals and the strategic layout, if we want to use Wordly maps or our new event modeling strategic level, see how the entire industry is shaping up and which direction you're pointing Event Store in.
Yep.
Why, and the community input on that, and your all the different clients. I mean, we use Event Store exclusively for all of our projects, given the choice. Obviously, if we come into another company that already has something in place, we're not going to rip things out. But for our default is always Event Store for any of our systems. So you don't have to convince me, but talk about just the general market and where everyone is, right?
Yeah. Before we go there, I think briefly it might be good for people who aren't aware that what's happened is that Event Store actually has been around since 2012.
Right.
It was open source in 2012.
Yeah, let's go to its history. You're right.
Yeah, maybe
what it is.
Its history and kind of where we got to, because it's interesting. It was originally created there was a pharmaceutical company in Bath, UK, called Bath ASU. It was a spin out of Bath University, and they. James Nugent was on that team. James Nugent, who some will be familiar with, some others won't, but a strong architect, folks. Very early in his career, he's done many things since then. Came upon event sourcing, went out and met Greg in the US, which was a big trip for him at the time, and came back and recommended that Bath ASU create an event store and use Greg to do it. And Greg had created multiple of these event stores in the past, and felt it was time to go ahead and create one that would be reusable and be an open source project for the community. And the guy the CEO of Bath ASU, which is one of the fastest growing pharmaceutical businesses in the UK, who's very entrepreneurial, said, well, if we do this, let's go ahead and do the commercial side of it as well. Whether we do anything with that in the future, who knows, but let's offer support. So even right away in 2012, support was offered with zero marketing. And Adam, I know you're aware of a lot of this because you were involved at different stages in all of these things.
Yeah, we live and breathe it, so we can't help but to overhear.
Yeah, and you were involved in before this with some of this. So I know you were aware as this time was going on. And interestingly, without any real growth plans, over the time before I started, there already was a very substantial clientele. Some fantastic logos like Walmart. Jet.com uses it for everything, and that got acquired by Walmart, and now Walmart uses it for a lot of its.
That's a really interesting story, and I think we should point out just the strength of this approach, where Jet.com, a smaller online e-commerce outfit, ended up just blazing trails so fast because of this certainty that you get with event sourcing, that all of a sudden within, what was it, 4 years, 5 years, there was an acquisition by Walmart. That's just incredible.
Yeah, very large one. And they continue as a key part of their Walmart's e-commerce technology.
Yeah, so it's a great acquisition, not for customers or whatever, but actually for the tech and for their approach, which is really an amazing reason to use Event Store. But aside the commercial, let's continue.
Volume and scale, and even the way they do it, you mentioned, is interesting too, because each team ends up with an event store with an event store cluster, and that those services are able to work off the same all stream. But then outside of that, they actually use Kafka to communicate.
That's right.
This is starting to be the way we're seeing kind of there's this argument about whether to call it microservices or services or mini services. But this is one of the things you do get out of this design technique is some prescription around how you would decide size of services and having autonomous services and things like that I don't see in other parts of the industry.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an uphill battle, and for sure, it's there's a lot of inertia out there, but
Yeah.
it's a one-way street. I mean, as I see companies adopt event store an event sourcing approach to have that traceability within each service, it's really hard to go the other way. It's kind of like taking the red pill, understanding that
Yeah.
wow, there's all this value on this approach, and it would be silly to go back and throw it away again.
Yeah. I do think the red pill is exactly right. I think I recall when I first learned object-oriented programming, and my wife would give me grief because I was like sending messages to my arm, to pick up my food, and like everything was object-oriented. And now I see, I see the capturing state changes and the importance of that. I see it all over,
The facts written on a timeline. Yeah.
Yeah. So that by the time I came in, there was already a strong business with strong logos. And that's one of I've done startups in the past, and I've never come into a company like this where you already had all this momentum built up. You already had a business that was just waiting, in my opinion. Now I'll tell you, when we talk about where we are and what's going on, it's dependent on a lot of things. It's dependent on community and a lot of things. However, I think it's there. I think the potential is tremendous. So when I came in, we did work. We kind of shored up. The support had been going on for quite a while, but we shored up the support team. We ended up hiring a lot of really strong engineers, many that you know already: James Giel, Chris Condren, Matt McLaughlin, Alexei Zimarov now is on the team, and many more. We continue to grow the team.
Yeah.
We've been continuing to grow the support customer base, and probably the most recent thing that is an inflection point. We hope it's early, which is bringing in Event Store Cloud, and making it easier, especially for the management side, having a rock solid production configured event store that's managed for you, that can scale at the level that you want it to scale, and you don't have to have that operations knowledge, because it's a distributed database technology. It's
meant to be used this way. Yeah.
Yeah. In small volumes, it's fine, but when you get into these larger volumes that we see with customers like Jet or Checkout.com or Zero or some of these others, that you need to be really great at the operational side.
Yeah.
So that's what's kind of where we are, is that we've scaled up the team substantially. We're like in the 35. I think today we're about the 35 people now. The majority of which is dev, is engineering with some support, and I'm including dev advocates in engineering because they are engineers. All of our dev advocates are engineers. All three of them.
Yeah. You get a lot of pointed questions from the CTOs at all of these, these places that are changing the way they work. So I don't see how you could do it without people that have that deep technical knowledge. So it just wouldn't work, I don't think.
Yeah. And that kind of leads to a bit to, one other thing. Well, it leads to what we're doing, I guess, is what is it that we're focused on, and where do we see ourselves providing value, and in the context of the community and the market. And we can contrast that with maybe some others that have a little bit different approach. The main thing that Event Store is focused on is being the world-class database technology for persisting events in Event Store systems. We view ourselves as a database company. We view that cloud is an important part of distribution of that database, of making it easier for people to use it. But in the end, it's about the database technology and about enabling developers to be successful with deploying and operating event source systems. So we're inextricably tied to the success of event sourcing itself. And by success, I'm not just meaning that more and more developers are using, that more and more developers and companies are successful using. Right. It still seems hard for a lot. I think you do a fantastic job, Adam, at showing that it can be simpler, that actually could be a simpler way of looking at the world.
Yeah.
But it's different, and lack of familiarity can be confused with complexity at times. And there is some complexity, with distributed systems, but the types of things like the modeling, the advancement of modeling techniques, the improvement in tooling, all of those types of things across every stack is what we're interested in as well. So this is another thing is and you see this with some of the things we're doing right now. It was already true that there were clients in multiple stacks. So, and I know your team worked on the Go client and the JavaScript client.
Yep.
But
yep.
Event Store sort of just supported the Event Store, the .NET client. And that kind of just helped the community here and there, if necessary, on the other clients. As a part of moving in the 20.10 release, Event Stores moved to this 3 times a year regular release schedule. So in the 20.10 release, the gRPC interface came out, which is where we think the future is for at least the near future around for Event Store. And one of the things that it both simplified the client and it also allows us to do multi-language easier. So we made the decision that we want to fully support every major language that we can.
Kind of like the JetBrains approach to IDEs, just work everywhere.
Yeah, we want. I mean, it's a database. Event Store to be a core infrastructure database technology. You don't need to know what technology it's written in. And as a matter of fact, that we can talk about that, things that are our thoughts around that. But it's not, that should not be what's important. What should be important is that you can access it with your favorite framework, with your favorite language, and with your community. And so that's another big part of what we're doing is trying to make this as accessible as possible across every stack. And we can't do that. We're never going to scale to the size to do that ourselves. This is going to be working with communities, and that's our approach, is to try to enable. So if people in the audience are interested in working in that way, we would love to work with you to help with if you're in your ecosystem, or you're a framework or anything like that, we want to help.
There's definitely a lot of people that are interested in certain in helping getting that help done for their particular language of choice, and people really fall in love with what they type in every day. So we're already getting some questions around Erlang and Elixir, so we can probably touch on that a little bit. But it's interesting how you can't do it all, and you need to have some standard way. gRPC seems to be a good choice right now to be able to integrate with whatever you like. I had some other question but got distracted by these questions. But anyway, maybe you can answer some of them,
sure,
especially in terms of the Erlang Elixir client, if that's there.
And not that I know of. Elixir is one that we're looking for anyone in that space who is thinking about doing a client. What's going on with the clients? Actually, let me give a little bit more. You might hear this is Yorik's talking tomorrow, right?
Yeah, exactly. So spoiler alert, tomorrow at the meetup, where we're going to have a little bit more visuals as the podcast, but tomorrow at our event-driven meetup, which we've been talking about, it's a great follow-up, and we'll probably have way more answers on the type of clients that we support, that Event Store supports, tomorrow. And it's actually an open question and answer session, so it's going to be a lot of back and forth. And if you have your favorite language, definitely show up for that. And Yorik is going to probably be one of the best people, I guess, right now, since that's what is kind of tasked with, right?
Yeah. Yorik interesting. Yorik's a great story anyway. I think he's on, but so his face may turn red, but he was already this fantastic, he's based in Paris. And was doing massive contribution to events to the community, and had written the Rust client and the Haskell client outside of Event Store at all. And then he joined Event Store. As he said, he got to do the things he was doing at night during the day now, and he enjoyed that. And one of the things he did was take in. As a matter of fact, I think the Rust gRPC client was the first available client, even before the .NET client or the JavaScript client. So it'll be good. He's a great person to talk about, and what it's allowed us to do. Now we've done the Java client, JavaScript client, Rust client, Haskell client, .NET client. The Go client is imminent. And
well, we have our own version of it, but it's not something we contributed to. So it's not documented well. We just use it internally.
Yeah, and we'd love to. We'd love to, as we had Peter, the guy in our team. Peter, I can't his long South African last name. Gorst, I forgot his last name.
Oh yes, Greg Grimushush. Yes.
Yes.
Starts with a G. Peter G.
Yeah, exactly. He wrote the
great guy.
Yeah, great guy. And he wrote the original Go client, first version of the gRPC client. Has sort of been languishing, and so we're picking that up. That's one of the very next things we're picking up, and we'd love to get feedback on that.
While we're on the subject of different languages, I think I remembered my question. It would have been I know that the Clojure community has had a lot of interest in event-driven systems and things like that. So is there any kind of movement around that, or is that all kind of falling under nothing, eh?
Not yet. That's an area, anything that's obviously functional languages and an event sourcing are a really wonderful fit. So, and Yorick has a lot of that. Yorick has a Haskell background, so pure functional, and brings a lot there as well. But
I can see this taking off quite quickly once, especially in those communities. I know that this entire event-driven approach has been big. The one article I have ended up being popularized by the Clojure community simply because of that focus on functional paradigms and immutability and relying on that good source of truth to understand what your system is doing.
We would love to work with folks in the Clojure community on a client.
Yeah, well, I think that's going to be imminent. I don't see that gap being there for long. But even if even if there isn't a client, it's pretty easy to interface. I mean, I remember James doing demos with curl on the command line just to show how you can easily interface with Event Store. Maybe just run through the kind of top level API and really what is the simplicity of Event Store that makes it so easy to adopt and so easy to use. And I obviously argue for it to be used by default. I think that breadcrumb trail and source of truth is so valuable no matter what stage you're at.
Yeah, well, that's great. And of course, I agree. As a matter of fact, when we talk about, you want to talk a little bit about, or do you want to answer some of these questions and I can talk to you kind of about where it's related to what you just mentioned is where I see this going, the impact on the industry and kind of what feedback I'm getting from the investment community as well.
Yeah. I know you've been back and forth with Gartner about where, we briefly mentioned it. So yeah, go ahead.
I think one of the most exciting things to me, and I've had, this is partly from some of the Silicon Valley type investors who we're in discussions with now, and kind of what could be the big idea that would impact our industry, which I believe, and more we're getting very interesting thesis. What I'm hearing from investors is we have a thesis that this is going to be fundamentally impacting our industry right now, and we're investing in it across the board. And one of the things that's coming out is this idea, if you look at what's going on in the industry, is there's massive interest in analytics type technologies. Yeah. If you look at the Snowflakes of the world and even Kafka, integration analytics it's a red ocean. If people, not everyone may know what that term means. There was a book called Blue Ocean. A red ocean is an ocean that's full of competitors that are bleeding all over. And the idea is you'd like to be competing in a blue ocean. Right. And there's been this premise, and Gartner's even saying this, that operational databases are going away, and they're wrong. So right away, I believe they're wrong. The reason they say it is because a lot of the operational databases are taking on analytic capabilities and can run analytic workloads. But their operational databases are not going away. The idea of a source of truth is all the more important. But what's going on is they're not innovating. They're not really responding to the change in analytics. They're just incorporating analytics workloads. Right. And you do have like CockroachDB. I think is an example of at least someone who's saying no. Operational database workloads are important, and they will be important. But CockroachDB really is just taking the same technology and kind of building a better mousetrap. A better distributed relational database technology. What's starting to be recognized is that the operational data store, the source of truth, ought to be not lossy if possible. In other words, keeping the state changes, It should put those state changes in business context, in events, and ideally in events, as we talk, one of the powers of this approach is that it's isomorphic. It's the same thing between what you do at design time to what you see in the data artifacts. And it should have a real-time event API so that it can feed into this analytic system. And one of the things that I've been arguing to these folks is that all of this analytic investment doesn't matter if you've been losing data in your source system, if you've been throwing data away, or you can't go back and have the source of truth represent it. And that they need all those three things that I just mentioned. They need, first of all, to not lose the data, to keep all of the state changes in the first place, because you're not going to, if you lost it, you can't get it at all. The data needs to be in business context. It can't be all sliced up into such a low level that you can't then use it when you outside of the system. And it needs
some row and some column.
Yeah, last name changed from Dimitrick to Smith. Yeah, or why? What does that even mean? And then finally, as opposed to these traditional databases, relational graph, whatever, the data went in, and you kind of had to go out and get it to pull it out. The real-time nature of an event store is required. It's first class in event stream databases like Event Store. Mm-hmm. And what our argument is that we believe, or I believe, the future of operational databases are event store type of databases, and event stores as a class of database is becoming more relevant.
Yeah, I think Chris Condren has a good presentation and he divides up databases into their types. Ordered storage, relational, graph, whatever. I think he has done a good job of really identifying it. I guess that kind of leads into that question about event store versus event store DB and why that's important.
Yeah, there was a few reasons. First of all, it wasn't the understanding that event store was a database technology. We found constantly with customers not understanding that it was actually a database technology, and so one of the main things we wanted to do was make that very clear in the name, the change to Event Store DB, and the difference between that and the name of the company as well. It also leaves room for some other things that we're intending to do. One of them is a event store, something we're calling, it's very early in this, event store functions, which is projection. Right now, as those of you who work with event store know, that it has a projections engine within it. And projections is an important aspect of using event store systems. However, the event right now, what we've got doesn't fully meet what you would call projections, what you want projections to be. It's really about taking streams and turning them into other streams, which is valuable. So one of the things we're going to be doing is moving that into an event store functions capability, which will allow you to write more powerful functions within the event store platform. And so this idea of starting to tool the lower parts of the platform, the infrastructure types of parts of the platform, a part of changing the name to Event Store DB was to help leave room for that and make it crystal clear that Event Store is a database technology. It's not a messaging technology. It can be used for messaging to a certain extent, but that's not what it's made for. It's made for being the source of truth database.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, to me, a lot of people would lump in Event Store with the Kafkas and messaging and all that all the time. So I definitely saw that coming, and I still see in the logo, it's still Event Store, and I guess people have to kind of now understand that Event Store is the company name, Event Store DB is the project name, and to keep that idea that it's really a repository for your data. I mean, we certainly use it as a sort of a message bus that's between two services, especially in the early stages of a project. It's really easy to just subscribe to another service's event store and get your information flowing across that way. Obviously, you start to mature that solution, and as you start to introduce security and other SLAs in and around that, you might want to introduce something else, like Jet introduced Kafka or other, ZeroMQ or whatever else you may want to use. But so
and I expect it is in our roadmap to support that in a more first-class manner as well. And we think that moving from a database technology to a messaging technology is easier to reason about than kind of trying to go the other way, trying to take a messaging technology and move it into a database technology.
Which is probably what Kafka's attempted to do. Yeah. So, I can certainly see that durable storage for if you missed a message, you definitely have a strong database behind that instead of an afterthought is kind of important.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay. So in terms of the change in terms of, let's say, one of the other biggest changes that I saw is the release cycle. The versioning has changed over the last year or so in terms of when when you put out a new version you're going to support. What was the reason behind that? Were people just getting lost in a really high version number, or is this a trend that we see? I certainly see it within JetBrains and other companies starting to release.
Yeah, it was trying to get that. It's the classic problem that I've seen with if you let the alternative of not having like a hard 3 times a year or 4 times a year, whatever you decide, release, is that any one feature can cause a release to go as long as possible. And we've run into this, and I've run into this many times in my career. You say, rather, you can kind of do, there's probably multiple ways to plan releasing of software, this type of software, that people are depending on. One is it's going to have these sets of features in it, and another is that the way that we're doing it, which is we're going to be cutting a release this time every point in the year, and you can depend on that. And if the only features that are ready go into the release, and this is supposed to allow predictability, allow us to have some discipline that if it's not ready, it doesn't go in, and we ship anyway. And that's a learning process for any software company that we've been going through. I mean, if you were to look back at the dates, we still didn't make our first. We were a month off of the date, the 2010 date when we actually released. And our intent is, we will make these dates and move into this discipline of a cadence, and get the value out there. And one of those is given a long-term support label, so we know what type of features will be in there, will be long-term supported, things like that.
Yeah, we certainly see that in the Linux kernel having larger point releases. We see that in Linux distributions having, Ubuntu does it twice a year.
Yeah,
with
it's similar to the
2-year long-term support ones, which is I think a model that works really well. Certainly is something that I adopted for even smaller iterations within the company to have, release candidate branches work with things that are, compose what you're going to release out there in a well thought out manner with complete code. So I think it's great to see that predictability brought in. Now, in terms of usually, maybe people are wondering, what does support mean? Like, what if someone that's listening says, you know what, I really want to, we've had some issues with our projects. I like the sound of this accountability piece. So we certainly love the fact that we can always trace back any errors through this breadcrumb trail of state changes that we get captured in Event Store. And so, proudly we say that nothing's really cost us more than 4 hours of finding and fixing the bug, which is, in my career beforehand, was unheard of. The best teams that I worked on still had, finding needles in a haystack problems that just derailed projects, and we simply don't have that. So, in terms of moving towards this type of event-sourced way of dealing with state and having a solid database underneath to store that data and retrieve it easily, right? Some of those guarantees are ordered storage. Global ordering is important because it allows you to really find that cause and effect on a very fine-grained scale and figure out your problem. So what are some of those services that support gets you when you sign up for Event Store DB implemented? What are some of the first documents maybe that you point people to? How do companies generally engage with the support side?
On the support side?
Yeah.
So first of all, this is not that important, but there is a whole set of levels of support.
Great.
The levels of support, other than there's one that's development phase support, which is called pre-production support, and then all the others are based on a service level. So that, which can be anything from next business day to current day to 8 hours to 4 hours to 2 hours, 24/7, things like that. And then the cost scales up based on which one you choose. And when you sign up, you get access to being able to write tickets. And those tickets are responded to based on service level. We actually oftentimes respond more quickly, of course, but that's the limit. It would be what the service level agreement is. And they allow anything around, there's architectural questions. We have to be careful at times because it can't, and this is something we're constantly on the border of trying to figure out, is what's an architectural question where it's more they need a consultant, of which we might not even be event stores as a consultant. They need someone. There's quite, as you might imagine, there are systems that they weren't, the issue's not really an event store issue.
That's right.
It's a design issue or an architectural issue.
Yeah.
But the team just has a full interaction. They have full access to the team when they're in their production systems. Do you draw that line quite? I guess you have to if you don't have extra time. But some of those questions are like you just don't understand event sourcing. This has nothing to do with event store itself. Yeah.
What often those are the tough conversations you probably must have with some clients.
We've even had clients fairly recently where we've said, you know what, we don't think we can support you, that you're completely your architecture, you didn't need to understand your event sourcing architecture really the right way, so you're doing things that are really unsupportable. The reason they're not scaling is because this design, this issue, and the way you implement the pattern. And what we recommend is, and we're, by the way, if someone's doing partnering on event source systems or consulting, well, like AdaptTech, like others, that's not the business that Event Store wants to be in. And we will be glad to refer customers to, trusted consultants who can help these folks. And they come along fairly regularly. Either prospects who, they talk about their architecture and they want one day of architecture. We do offer like architecture advisory consulting. So, limit that to a day or two. But oftentimes what they actually need is weeks and weeks of redesign of systems.
Planning and seeing how I think a lot of people drag in, obviously, what they think the past experience is good, is going to help them. And I've certainly, from this theoretical high level approach, not really anything to do with Event Store DB, but you touched on the subject. But it's a lot of times it's about being able to clear your mind and learn from the start, not really dragging in tools and practices and patterns that have very little value, perhaps in an event source systems where that data is a lot more accessible. The amount of abstraction and indirection is much less, which is really where you want to be to get that speed and accuracy. So maybe it's the inundation of the industry with so much of the traditional tooling around RDBMS that's holding people back from, it's that extra knowledge is what's getting in the way. It's not that people don't know enough. It's that they know too much of a different way of working. Yeah. It's hard to get that across to people, I think, sometimes.
I've seen it firsthand and I know you have, Adam, as well. When we were training people at Line Data, and we had an intent to move a large part of the workforce, and it was not uncommon for the brand new, computer science graduate to just get it. And the guy who'd been doing relational database and ORMs, really strong at that, but to just have such a difficult time making the transition. But there's this huge amount. We've been trying to I've been trying to categorize sort of what are all the benefits that I have, like 12 benefits. They're not iconic. They may not be the right 12 benefits, but they're these super compelling benefits: the non-lossy nature, the occasionally connected scenarios, the ability to synchronize caches, and they're like, if you just look at those benefits, you say, yeah, I want that. That's worth it. But the thing is, they don't come without a new way of thinking about writing systems and building systems, which is the way it's always been. We think it's new, but I can tell you, I've been in this industry for a long time. We've gone through these types of transitions. The relational database was that transition as well.
Yeah. Same with Agile and all sorts of things. You can name one thing after another. It's kind of odd that people act like this is the last thing they'll ever need with so many things. And there's always something around the corner. So, but at least, for me, it's really good to see that we're still on the adoption curve of event sourcing, and it's all going in a positive direction. So the market's growing, people are waking up. The generations are retiring. There's people that are switching careers. There's enough of an ebb and flow of people that these concepts are sticking around. And every single year that I turn around, there's new things, tons of new frameworks. I mean, even looking at a framework like Axon, it was really kind of belittled and like, it's kind of hacky. You look at what they've done in the recent years, it's just night and day. And everyone that was kind of poo-pooing these frameworks, they've actually come quite a long way and answered some of those design problems, challenges, overcomplication. Maybe they've simplified them. And so I see a great deal of adoption. And as a store for any of these frameworks, you can just plunk in, many of them you can just plunk in a event store in there, event store DB right in there, and it should work. So especially now that we're getting all the clients, which we'll talk about tomorrow, we should see a plethora of different frameworks all of a sudden ready to go with event store DB, which would be quite neat. Now, for people that are in operations, and they obviously talk about the operational complexity, because they're now no longer just supporting an RDBMS. Now they're supporting a stream database or ordered global event database, whatever you want to categorize it as. It's a new thing. It's an operational complexity. So what are some of the kind of toolings for the ops people that they can find? I know there's Greg certainly has been talking about the visualization for correlation causation IDs and stringing together cause and effect within streams and things like that. What's the UI looking like on the client that the admin?
That's, I don't have that much knowledge of some of that area, and that there's things that are going on. Yorick, actually, who's talking about clients, poor Yorick, I'm probably throwing him under the bus here, but he's also he has a CLI, for example, that allows you to interact with the database in a richer way that he's been playing around with. And there is work that we have on the roadmap around improving you already can browse streams and you can do some things with seeing the stream. But that's one area that we need to improve on is as you've mentioned already, we've got the data in its business context, just being able to navigate the event store itself through a UI, through standard mechanisms, and follow correlation ID and causation ID. Those are all things that are in plan. Now, of course, they're sort of operating it in the cloud, whether it's your cloud or our cloud, the event store cloud. That's another thing that can help with the operational side is, and there's in the cloud console. One of the things that's going to happen there is that it's going to be richer and richer, although mostly that'll be about understanding the health of your servers, things like that.
Right, of course, yeah. The load, whether you're killing your machines by over drowning them in data or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I
certainly I can appreciate that aspect. I think there's just a lot of from the customer service level. We've implemented something. We have Event Store as the backing database. I know that a lot of our guys have worked in places where they introduced event sourcing, and we're surprised that the customer service reps were giving them information about where exactly the problem was and how to fix it. And that's just kind of neat. And sure, the ops people can know which servers are kind of overheating and things of that nature, but the customer service reps can look at the actual stream data, and because it's written in business language, say that this customer had a problem buying this item, and it's because this other person here took the discount off or whatever it was. It's just an amazing, I've never seen so many reports of customer service reps being able to be so much more functional because the actual business events have bubbled up, not just through the tech stack, but through how the solution works right underneath.
One of the positive side effects of having the isomorphic nature between the design artifacts and the actual data artifacts. And Yeah, you're right. I think that's an area where we could do more tooling and more built-in tooling for Event Store to get just value that everyone would get. So,
Yeah.
you're talking about adoption. One of the interesting things we've seen is that when we introduced cloud, we haven't, Event Store still hasn't done much marketing or promotion. And we don't plan to, we're not planning a huge amount of that, but we did do some around cloud. And we probably have seen triple, not probably, we have seen triple the amount of customers with the cloud offering. And that what we're finding is that there's a large number of implementers of Event Store, which correspondingly means event sourcing out in the world that we're not aware of, that we're not getting exposed to them, but it's being adopted in this grassroots manner. And I think that's made us quite optimistic about the future.
Yeah, I certainly see a lot of like anything event driven. I see people coming out of the woodwork where I didn't really anticipate things. I mean, we had just on the event modeling side, we had a whole product be kind of developed without even consulting me or asking me for guidance, and just appeared. And then when they were ready, they talked to me. So the same thing with event sourcing, right?
Yeah. It's the risk there is that, and one of the things we're really trying to, and Axon's doing a good job at as well, is try to get more content out there, more documentation around even the basics of how to build these systems. So you have like Alexei Zimarov doing talks about just the basics of DDD, CQRS, and event sourcing. Because we still encounter something we mentioned earlier, a lot of customers who are coming on, they're far along. They've kind of grassroots found event sourcing the way that I did at Line Data, but they didn't have the luxury of going and getting Greg and finding Chris. And so they've built these systems and they got something wrong because it's still difficult to find prescriptive approaches for building these things where you don't hang yourself. And that needs to improve. Frameworks are one way to help with that.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that, just as a recent sort of idea that I keep coming across of is just the tombstoning, right? I think there's some, a way to do that in Event Store, to switch over to a new stream and, reference back to, or even reference forward to where, what the ID is for the new stream. I think it's kind of a big concern. Maybe we should talk about it. Is I think event source systems kind of suffer a little bit from, at least this is my experience. Correct me if it's different for you. But I think the way that event sourcing has been sold at the very beginning, or at least really looked attractive to a lot of people at the very beginning, was the idea that you could have a timeline and go back all the way to the beginning. So if there was ever any issue, you could replay all events from beginning of time. Well, that's, I think it was taken to heart a little bit too much. And so when you want to, adjust a bug in your projection, now you have 10 years of data, it's going to take 2 days to replay it all. This idea of what OLTP, online transaction processing, what is your footprint to actually get the system running? And then what do you have kind of on ice on the slower disks in case you need to look, or, at the extreme in backup tapes. But I don't think we need to do that these days for most systems.
I think you're absolutely right that, and this is the next order of prescription of because it's nuanced. It's kind of like versioning is, right? It's nuanced, and as to what the right answer is there. Is it closing the books? Is it a type of special snapshotting strategy where you're putting everything behind the snapshot in a less expensive storage?
Exactly. Yeah.
Those things I think best practices are still emerging, but one of them is not. You're right. Is keeping terabytes and terabytes of data, and we have that, and it shows up. Imagine even if you need to upgrade your version of Event Store, and you need to just go side by side, best conditions, and you have terabytes and terabytes of data. It makes it very difficult. And we are offering strategies for a lot of the work we're doing right now is smarter and smarter migration strategies, because we are getting customers with years and years of data that are very high volume that didn't have a close the books strategy. Maybe for good reason, some of them for good reason, but we will be doing things to try to help with that. So those are advances. And Chris Condren, at some point, I think having a discussion with Chris Condren and James Gill potentially about the sort of the lower level kind of future of for scaling and what we're doing. Things like the ability to replicate straight at the chunk level. So work at lower levels of the database for the highest speed migration capability.
Exactly. Yeah.
It still doesn't change your point, though. Just even if you have that, a lot of times you need to still have a close the books model or a snapshot model.
Yeah, I think the other thing with all of this is that there was that first answer to the performance hit for having to replace so much, at least from the aggregate side or to process a command to get the next event in. Needing to read all those events would be the bottleneck. We're not even talking about projections or the reporting side. So I think there was always an infrastructure answer, like we'll just put in snapshots. But I think what's happening is that, like you just already said, it's a modeling question. It is actually a business concern. It can't be pushed to infrastructure because you kind of need to know, just like with pen and paper, what records you have at hand in your filing cabinet versus what records you have over in the warehouse where you put the last year's copies of things. So that kind of mentality kind of left. We thought that we're always sold some good tools, I think, in this industry where everything will be done for you and you can just think about your business more purely. It's digitized and it's different than pen and paper. It's better. It's like information's information. It's yours and you need to understand where it is.
Yeah.
And so trying to push some business level concerns into infrastructure concerns has been kind of an unhealthy thing that I've seen before. Maybe it's overzealous, vendors that want just more features to sell and they catch on for the wrong reasons with business. Who knows? But
and what I would view is, from my perspective of being I'm fairly new to the event sourcing and, really just a few years of being in this in a deep way. And I've been in a deep way, but I think one thing that's really cool about this community, and it comes from VDD, I think, or I don't know for sure where it comes from, but this idea of going all the way back to that, the willingness to come back. And Greg would talk about it a lot in his talks of actually, why are we holding our systems to a higher level of accountability than the real world? And is it even really a requirement? And quite often it's not. And when you get into occasionally connected systems and designing event source systems, you need to be able to go back and do that. And you have the tools to do that from the design side. It's at the business side. The majority of this stuff gets dealt with.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting. And I mean, even in our meetup, we've touched on a lot of these topics from the design perspective. And, it's one of those things where we kind of looked at one point, well, Event Store DB has its data folder where those chunk files are, and they're pre-allocated and each event gets serialized and written into each one. Really perform really awesome. But there's a lot of those chunk files that grow. Can we have, a data and a data archive directory? And where maybe the archive directory could be, SSHFS kind of mount instead. So it's actually sitting on another computer on a different storage. It's obviously slower, but for the odd few streams that need to be addressed, that doesn't really matter. Those, it's like if you go to your, favorite website and you go to My Orders and you click on one from like 2018.
Yeah.
You kind of expect the thing to spin a little, right? Like if you're right now purchasing something, adding stuff to your basket, sure, it's got to be like responsive, etc. But if you're doing something odd that's done like 1 in 1,000 times, do you need to keep it to that level? It's really about control of, everything that you have at your disposal, and even sometimes deterring bad behavior from your users or discourage how your system's not supposed to be. You're not supposed to be copying orders from 2018. We probably don't have those products. Why are you looking at those? Sure, maybe once in a while you need to, but it's certainly not in the company's interest to make it easy for you to abuse their system.
Yeah. Absolutely. I totally agree. And tiered storage, again, we're doing a lot of things on the database side, advanced work on the database side around the storage engine itself. Having the ability to have tiered storage, it will enable that. And also multi-tenant as well. Similar, it turns out.
Yeah, that was a big one. Holy smokes. Yeah, maybe if you want to stop there, because I think it's a big one, and explain multi-tenancy, because we've had that question from a lot of clients before. So maybe give me your perspective. You probably must get it 10 times as bad as I do.
Well, actually, generally what we say is Event Store DB doesn't support multi-tenancy.
Right.
It's a non-trivial thing to introduce, especially in a secure way. And where there is absolutely no possibility that one tenant could step on another. I know everyone who's listening understands what multi-tenancy is, the idea that you could have essentially multiple. In Event Store, a lot of times what people are talking about is multiple all streams on the same cluster.
Right.
And which could result in that could be that you're offering multiple customers of your customers and you want them isolated, or it could just mean you want it for yourself and your own business. But it's a non-trivial item to put in the all stream. And at the moment, when we talk about horizontal scalability, and that's about that crosses global ordering too, what we're talking about with the all stream, with multiple all streams. Doing the work to do that, it actually is in the storage engine work that's going on right now that Chris and James could talk in depth about. And mostly what we talk about is it's non-trivial to do. And right now, the way you would support that is through multiple clusters.
Of course.
So some ways, that's really the Event Store DB scalability story right now is multiple clusters. The way that, say, a jet.com is using it and others, the way they're able to get the type of volumes they're able to get is by using a multi-cluster strategy. But we want to change that. We want the option for you to be able to have multiple all streams on the same, or DBs on the same cluster. There's a whole set of things. There could be a whole interesting conversation, I think,
of course.
I mean, have around what we're planning to do. Even making all nodes not doing the same activity. Replacing the consensus algorithm with already. The consensus algorithm already is powerful and it's well tuned for like doing the things consensus is good at doing, because consensus is generally slow. So it's good for leadership changes that happen seldom. It's really bad for replication. For scalability reasons. But we're going to be moving over to like an egalitarian Paxos type of model approach, which gives horizontal scalability. So cross data center scalability, some really cool things that we're planning to do that are in the roadmap on the database side. But probably the best person to talk about, like I say, is Chris Condren and James Gill.
Yeah, because right now we're, for anyone that really needs to have a multi-tenancy answer and, have one cluster, what we're doing is we're putting a layer on top of Event Store DB and never actually replaying an all stream. It's relying on indexing. And I understand that you guys are also really doing a lot on the indexing side as part of this work.
Yes,
and so having that, what we're doing currently manually, as it doesn't really cost our clients much more because it's the same stack we repeat for each client, but it's our own thing that we have to put on top of Event Store DB to support multi-tenancy. And so now it would be really nice to say, well, there's a standard way to do this. If I have some sort of a convention where I can prepend something or whatever, or just have another parameter for my call, I can easily just have Event Store do all that indexing for me. Definitely that tiered storage thing is huge. That's certainly for blue-green deploys and being able to guarantee really fast rollouts. I think a lot of the challenges in event sourcing and adoption of it, as I mentioned, there were these initial not misunderstandings, but I guess overuse of certain advantages and taking things to a little bit too much of an extreme, thinking that it's entirely a new thing. Having these really long event streams were kind of impossible to do. Now we're starting to come in where we need to understand that a little bit better. So I'm really curious to see when those pieces will be in there. What's the kind of roadmap that you're kind of planning? What's public, what's not, what's part of the open source pieces? What are you doing internally? And maybe actually that's one thing we didn't cover. What's the difference between the open source offering and the the commercial support?
At the moment there's very little difference between the commercial. There is a commercial version. It actually isn't sold. There is no commercial license. Well,
Mhm.
I think we might have a commercial license, but there is no, it's not even a different piece of software. There's a couple of
Right.
utilities that get bundled
Mhm.
when you get the commercial version, and it comes with support as a part of support. It's not, you can't buy the commercial by itself. There is
Right.
the kind of the classic commercial open source model, which this is interesting from a business. I can tell you a little bit of what's going on from a business model perspective, and it relates to this. Is that when I first came in, I looked at Event Store and said, this is a classic kind of, really, let's use an open core, if you've heard of open core, commercial open source approach to things, and we'll keep a really strong database, keep the clustering that's in the database, all the core things that make Event Store great, but we'll add enterprise level features on top of that.
Mhm.
And then we'll charge more for that, and that'll give us more of the hockey stick thing we want in revenue that
Mhm.
investors like, because we'll be selling licenses, and you have a software license model. What's happened though is, and we may get back to that, we may offer more enterprise features that are part of a commercial version, but we're not planning that right now.
Mhm.
And the reason is because of the cloud, is that the business model works so much better, because essentially Event Store becomes a SaaS-based company. We're offering a subscription service of Event Store DB and a support service. And it's sort of crowding out our work on commercial licensing, and it's becoming less and less interesting. That I just want the features to be in Event Store, because everybody benefits, and it leads to people they're going to go on cloud anyway. More and more, folks are going to take advantage of the cloud offering, especially if we keep it competitive. So that's where we're going. Kind of business wise, it's more emphasis on the cloud and less on commercial. The way right now, what's emerging is something we call RFC, an RFC model. That's our way to engage with the community about the future features. Some of these features, I'm not sure if they've gone into the RFC approach, the ones we're thinking of, but they will be. So there'll be RFCs that everyone will be able to. There are already some that exist out there. Contribute to in an open source type model, and either participate in or influence the development of them.
Yeah, it's interesting how the world's kind of changing to the SaaS model, yet we still have people that want to run stuff on bare metal, and we certainly had from the political side a bunch of services that were denied from AWS because of content and all that. So there's always going to be a fringe that's going to be needed. We certainly had one client that pushed the other way from cloud. Like I said, we actually want everything that we're doing on a bunch of servers in this place, and there is no internet. Like, okay. I guess the nice thing about Event Store is that it's just a small executable that's running. It's just looking at a data folder and for where it stores the events, and that's it. So for many other applications, I think it would have been incredibly tough to say that. And this is funny, because that was a requirement that came in at the 11th hour. Oh, great that you did all this and it runs on the web, but you know what, actually for next week, we need it on-prem, no internet for you. And like, great, wonderful to find out this requirement hours before it needs to go live. But I think the simplicity of event sourcing and just how we treat data and state allowed us to do that work in a matter of a couple of days for a trivial amount, and ran all the tests, ran the thing, it all worked, which is a lot. You can't say that with a lot of other systems, to really take things out of the cloud and put them to run on metal again, or an edge device or mobile device, etc. That we're obviously trying to re-implement some of the Event Store API for local storage on phones. We have some customers that are wanting to have distributed applications running on phones. Now you got Linux phones happening, so it's a brave new world. We don't really know what to expect, in the next 10 years.
You get into occasionally connected as well. We're doing, interesting occasionally connected, customers doing occasionally connected in grocery stores and other kiosk type scenarios, and which fits. It's a great fit for that.
Exactly.
Ships that have they lose connectivity when they're out in the ocean and then come back into connectivity. That's another.
Yeah, sync up with that. Yeah, we had one client that had a long history of cruise ship software, so they were used to that kind of thinking, which is really good because those kind of clients understand the audit trail that makes it so important that, anytime you have to sync up and all you have is state in a bunch of third normal form tables, you're scratching your head how you got there and how are you going to make sense of what's happened on shore during that time. Whereas if you have a ledger backing each side, you kind of have the smart git merge kind of operation where you can investigate on a fine level what and why the changes happened along the timeline, if they're compatible or not, or if there's a business rule you can implement to have one win over the other and things like that. So much easier to do with event sourcing and event store DB. So yeah, there's a bunch of other questions I had. Let me just see if I can get rid of mine before we ask others. So we talked about the kind of brushed a little bit on the clients. I want to save that for tomorrow, definitely. In terms of, the cloud rollout, let's just, while we're on the subject, the first ones that you did obviously were AWS and followed up with Google Compute and then Azure, the most recent one.
At the same time. We went in October, we went into preview mode with AWS and GCP at the same time. And they're so similar and frankly, so much easier to work with than Azure. That was a part of it. We were lucky enough to get a guy on the team, a guy named Zach Schneider, who had done this a couple of times. He'd done it for a company called Instana and also for Rackspace. So he already kind of knew where we were going, and he knew that he could do AWS and GCP right away, and he knew it was going to be some more work to do Azure. Azure, from an API perspective and working in this way with Azure, there's a lot of challenges that don't exist, interestingly, with AWS and GCP.
Interesting.
Yeah. And he can tell you, he can give you a bit of a rant about it. There are positive things with Azure that, and there's some reporting that's, we could link to at some point that CockroachDB just did that is interesting around kind of what the strengths and weaknesses are from a database perspective of running on the different clouds.
Interesting.
And Azure does really well in storage, but there's other places where their stability we really see challenges with. But that being said, what really seems to be happening with our customers, InvestorDB customers, is they've already got this decision's already been made for them. And it's going to be one of those three usually, or they're going to be on-prem, the way you mentioned it. We want to support all those things. So in October, we went into preview with GCP and AWS. And by preview means it's the same event store database technology that you're all using. It's the 20.10 release, and it supports production workloads, but there's some things we hadn't built yet. Like we rolled it out with what do you need to run a production environment, but things like billing, some other things we still had to work out along the periphery, and that's what's been keeping it in preview. In December, we rolled out Azure, or we released Azure, and we went into preview just recently, just a few weeks ago. Mm-hmm. We already have live production customers on the cloud, and as I mentioned, and incredible, not incredible, but a very large backlog of customers that they're getting ready to move over to their production workloads. Mm-hmm. It's really inexpensive to come in at the developer level. Yeah. Although what you might find interesting, I did when we were doing this, is that it's not what we're building right now is not a super developer friendly experience. It's meant for production. We're focusing on first what you need to run your production system on. So for example, you can't, when you go in, you choose the cloud provider you want, you choose the region that you're interested in. And if it has the right availability, the number of availability zones, that region will be available. And you're going to want to choose something close to whatever your application, where your application at AWS or GCP or Azure is at. And then it'll deploy those clusters and the network that you've got, the network you have there. And then you need to peer that with the network you have at AWS, GCP, et cetera. You can do it still from your developer environment, but you need to use a VPN of some sort because we don't expose those databases to the open internet.
Right.
And
of course.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, it means there's some steps as a developer, and more likely, a lot of the development experience should still be, for now, working in your Docker environment or in a local environment while you're working things out, and then move it over to cloud, move your sort of production-oriented systems into cloud. We're going to change that over time, and we've got views of how we'll make it very seamless to be able to VPN directly from your development environment into a cloud instance. So those are the set of the many things we've got on the roadmap for cloud going forward.
Yeah. Well, luckily, event sourcing is one where it's a little bit easier to make the transition from your local dev environment to the cloud. I find anyway. I think there's a lot more aligning the planets and swinging dead chickens at full moon at midnight when you're dealing with traditional systems that have a way more coupling than what you usually find with a type of approach with event sourcing. You can certainly be a lot more deliberate, and you certainly see the seams a lot more clearly where your infrastructure starts to take over from what your business logic for your functional requirements is doing. So that's really great. Let's maybe we can answer some questions from people here. We had a bit of chatter on our little room for Zoom. Definitely going to talk about the Erlang Elixir we kind of touched on, and that's going to be discussed a lot more tomorrow. Okay, moving. How's event store in terms of service? So what about the terms of service? I don't know if you're going to have the legal detail on this, covering cases like AWS shooting down a bunch of services. I guess we kind of touched on that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's a concern, or I'm guessing there's probably a standard clause with most of SaaS offerings for cloud that
offer a service level higher than the underlying cloud provider.
Right. Yeah. It's literally if they turn off the power, there's nothing you can do.
If AWS goes down. I mean, there's some things there are things that we've talked about, but we haven't implemented because a log database like this is very amenable to geo replication and even potential cross cloud replication. Not in a completely non-lossy way, but but those types of things are possible. And the way we're building things with a multi-cloud capability, it's not out of the question that you could have that type of capability.
Definitely build in a lot of, it's easier to build redundancy with event source systems. That whole idea of, you already mentioned caching, and when you're dealing with an immutable stream, caching becomes cache invalidation. All these different things that come up as hard topics end up going away. A lot of race condition and multi-threaded topics go away because you're queuing. Queuing is kind of like the answer to a lot of threading things. So I think your list of 25 things that you like is probably more like 100 things that are done better if you do event sourcing. And I think the underpinning is that you are taking a functional, immutable approach, which is really the reason that it works. It's just nice to have it extended to top level business concerns as well, not just some mathematical reason why functional programming or immutable storage is good. Definitely another topic that we could talk about for an entire day. Let's see what else we have. You're just okay. Sorry, that's someone else. Oh yeah, no, they've gotten distracted with all the recent political stuff. So our chat's just gone off the deep end. It's just okay.
Did Justin have a question, or did I?
No. That's the thing. Like, don't take social question from the political side. Take it from the power dynamic that AWS has. Though, like I come from a country where you don't have anything to say, and watching this, unless you come to me and say by law in United States you're violating this, that's obviously you need to take it down. But all the thing is kind of like event store decide that they want, for political reason or not, decide to shoot the server down. That's a really hard situation to be at, especially selling it to like a CEO, CTO that do care about that. So I don't want to like take that as a political thing. It's take it more like objective approach. That power dynamic of doing it without repercussion or like putting companies in that situation, that's bad. Today's parlay, tomorrow is wherever they decide to be.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about just the general risk of dependency on AWS at all, aren't you? I think.
Yeah, from my perspective, it's kind of like if I do business with Events or the company, what are the terms of service? If I tomorrow start another Twitter where people may not do illegal things, but you decide to pretend that they did without legal proof of what you're talking about, how I'm gonna cover from your perspective? Because you could just shut the service, and if we rely on you and the management and stuff like that, you're gonna be in that really hard position. And my take is kind of like if you're talking about legal stuff, like literally United States says this is illegal, great, I don't have a problem. That's what we all decide as a country to trust and go through the process. But
Yeah.
in Amazon situation, it was kind of like we think you're doing illegal things, and we're gonna shoot you down, and up you go. So yeah.
That's an interesting. I don't think I've developed a nuanced opinion about. I think the risk exists, but our terms of service, we haven't really gone into what would be what could there be something that we would choose to turn down. But I think the question you're talking about is if AWS decided to, right?
Do I do business with you or with AWS if I use a cloud? That would be my first thing that I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So if I pay you and I say, look, I'm gonna pay for the cloud hosting, whatever that means. I don't know if like technically you have your computer, you just offload to AWS. I don't know.
Yeah.
But if I'm doing business with you, how would that work?
Three-way partner.
You are doing. It's a good point. You're doing. If you choose AWS as you have the choice to use whatever cloud provider you want. Well, out of the three major cloud providers, but it is a good point that you're choosing to also do business with them because we are using their underlying capability. We're just doing EC2 instances and doing the work, the same work that you would have to do, just with some more knowledge on top of AWS. And so generally, my view is that usually this is going to be whatever constraints a customer has had, or you've had to have, and you've chosen AWS. You're going to have the similar issues. You have to be committing to the similar dependency on that cloud provider when you work with Event Store.
So basically, okay. So the infrastructure itself per se is still my responsibility, but my business with you is more like a management.
Yeah, it is a database management service that
okay.
we take care of all provision for you. Like you don't have to provision the clusters or provision the machines or any of that. But really, it is just a managed service for you over the cloud provider of your choice, which is usually going to be the same cloud provider you've chosen for your application already.
Okay. Okay, so it seems to be, you put always kind of confusing, in terms of the terms of service, but it seems to be that you're more focusing in the management, not the infrastructure. The infrastructure, I still have to provide it to you, so I need to figure that out by myself.
Yes, I mean you won't have. There's not much. The way that it works in the offering right now is here's a set of possible cluster configurations of different sizes that would meet different workloads. Which do you want? And then you choose and what cloud provider do you want and what region do you want? And at that point, so that you can be close, so you have a good latency characteristics. And then at the point you say, I want that, that's deployed out into that particular region. And then you peer to that. And then that database is managed by Event Store on a day-to-day basis.
Got it. Yeah, that totally makes sense. I think maybe it's clear in the terms of service or no, I may miss it, but it will be something really important since doing consulting, a lot of people now are kind of worried in terms of like what happened. Yep.
That's good to know. That's good to know, Joris.
Yeah. So I just want to have like clear answer to them. Like if they want to take it from political side or not, I don't care about that, but I want to be able to say, look, this is the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yep. A lot of what we modeled, this may help a little bit or not, is a lot of what we did was model after what MongoDB has done with Atlas. our view is we're a database technology company that wanted to offer a service, and here's one that seems to be providing a lot of value and being successful. And so there's a lot of similarities in even the user experience and the way we set it up to what MongoDB does with Atlas.
Yep, that totally makes sense now.
Yeah, I guess it's been kind of done for you with so many other databases out there that needed to move to the cloud. And there's a standard expectation now of what that SLA is really from support and other aspects.
Yeah, I mean, we could have never built it with the speed that this came, the time frame that we built this in, if we weren't doing that hadn't already been worked out.
Yeah, like it's almost good that Event Store didn't do anything in the cloud for customers until now. It would have definitely been a bigger investment of resources and would have probably detracted from other things.
Yeah, yeah.
You would have had to invent the same tool.
So you're kind of not the pioneer, but the settler mentality of allow all the other databases to find out what works, what doesn't, and then move into taking the best lessons and know exactly what you're going to offer instead of experimenting.
Yeah,
so that's really good.
I had a question.
Yes, Justin.
Pleasure to meet you through Zoom, and it's really awesome to have you on our podcast here. I also work with AdaptTech and with the rest of the crew, and
cool.
It's always special to have people like you in the community to come join us. You were talking about content before, and one thing I've had difficulty with is I've ventured on over from the dev side, architecture side, dabbling a little bit in the sales side, is the content. What did, from your perspective, from a business perspective, what content grabs people? What's you're going into an enterprise and you're basically telling them the way you've been doing this is wrong. You got to do it like this. You know, executive is going to be like, yeah, I'll give you 5 minutes, right? So for me, I guess I have two questions. This is the first. We'll lead into the next one. Okay. What content really grabs you?
Because I'm like everybody who's like been thinking about this a lot and living this, it ends up being a nuanced answer because the persona matters, the situation matters, and there really is. We've been talking about a journey, that there's a journey, and there's different and the personas that lay across that journey, and there's different content depending on where someone is in the journey and what their persona really is. Are they a CTO? Are they a CTO who's trying to justify this to their enterprise or to themselves, who is forward thinking enough to think there could be thought leadership here? Or are they fear-based? Are they, because then you can, content around losing data and the risk of losing data. Do you really want that? Or when your CEO comes to you and says, you want this business requirement, you have a new business requirement and you aren't able to satisfy it, is very powerful for certain personas. With architects, it oftentimes is, this is the way the microservices approach, and the way I say microservices, and I do that mean that in a loose term, the modularity side of things.
Sure, some responsibility.
Yeah, all of those, there's a set of content around that, and we have from learning to proof of concept to project to production and to operation. Is kind of the way we've laid out a journey. And we've been doing content mapping across all of that. And there's the ones we get, like when Alexi does a basic DDD CQRS ES talk, we will get a ton that comes in, a big pop around the learning journey, the early stage, as you might expect.
Yeah.
For example, we had just Savas, I don't remember Savas's last name, just did an article. I don't know if you've seen it. It's been one of the best performing blog articles we've had in a while on immutability and versioning. He's someone who's out of, I think his Parcel, I can't remember where he's out of, but anyway, he wrote an article that really has got a lot around versioning, which has been quite interesting, which we know is one of the harder problems, but that tends to be more further down the journey when you understand you're creating.
But you're not only interested in the people who are wanting to get their hands on it and learn it, but they're connecting the various different audiences via their problem space or their hard problem to solve is what grabs them and gets them in there. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of forward thinking and front-loaded content you got to create for each kind of persona or each part of the journey.
Yeah.
And so there's no real way around it. It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. As a matter of fact, that allows me to plug something I meant to, which is we've had for a while now, I think probably about 9 months, a guest writer program where if anyone is interested in writing articles, we're also willing to promote any good article wherever it is. We don't want to necessarily or have to be the one who does this, of course, Event Store DB, but we want and we'd love for community to do that. And we have a guest writer program where we actually pay a bit of a bounty. I don't remember what it is now, something like $300 or something. And if you write something around event sourcing, whatever, it doesn't have to be about Event Store DB, it's about event sourcing or content. All the better if you can fill there's a bunch of gap areas that we know we need content in. So if anybody's interested in that, we would love to involve you.
Yeah, what a great way to get your name out there as well, especially if you've been sitting in the background, really heads down, working on event sourcing to understand it and have come out with a really good perspective. And that's a real good way to get your name out there and show the world that you understand these concepts and also help people understand them and fill in these gaps in the community. So I know that's a lot of hard work, and a lot of people, if they self-publish, may not have the same amount of eyes on it as if they engage in the community. Yeah.
Yep.
That's a great segue into my next question.
Who is helps everyone who's working on those right now, and a whole pipeline of content that's coming out of the community that we're really excited about.
Great.
Awesome. I just have one more question, and it's actually in line with publications and content, more towards the perspective of AdaptTech. I'm putting together a monthly newsletter for AdaptTech, and one of the sections that's going to be in it is going to be a technology focus. For example, event sourcing as a technology. Let's focus on it. Normally when I would write something that focuses on something, I'd like to provide examples. And I guess Event Store would be a fantastic example of where it's native. I mean, it's the roots of event sourcing in terms of an applied technology. You could point right to Event Store or Event Store to DB. Yeah. My question to you is, I'm guessing you don't mind if I use any of your quotes or any of the things that you've said in the past to help establish the content of this particular part that I'm writing.
Of course not. No, absolutely.
And these would be good parts. These would be ultimately the ones that shine the brightest light. So, and that's what I'm endeavoring to do. There's other sections. The first one's going to be coming out in a few days. So we're going to highlight event modeling naturally. It's I hope to have a comic in there. I really wanted to have a good old school feel, but with new school technology. You remember when you read the newspaper and there was a comic strip? Stuff like that, it gives it there's a bit of a nurturing feel to it. So if you don't mind that, then I might, and I don't want to grab too much of your time, but I might send a question or two your way to help enrich some of the data that might be in this article. And even if you want to proofread it, just to make sure I'm concise and accurate, that would be much appreciated.
Yeah, we would be glad to do that. And like I said, we actually have a full-time content person now, content manager, who coordinates the group, the guest writer program and a few other things. And also Matt McLaughlin, who is our head of dev advocacy. We can include him in it as well.
Absolutely. And this is the sort of, and every month it's, the technology preference kind of changes. We'll give a different flavor. And we're talking about communities, community building, involving yourself in a community, not necessarily needing to pump the tires of AdaptTech or Event Store or anything like that, but strengthening the community. And, it should write itself almost. You strengthen the brand too, you strengthen AdaptTech, you strengthen the Event Store and all the associated partnerships therein.
Yeah. To me, that's a sign of when at least for me, a business that I want to be in is when you don't have to really push your particular technology that much, because you can push a larger agenda, a value proposition, and then you just happen to benefit. If event sourcing is successful, if we're good, Event Store DB will be successful.
Yeah, thanks, Justin, for that. I forgot to mention it. I just wanted to sort of ask, actually, is there a event store? I mean, you're doing all these media publishing. Is there like I guess a newsletter of your own that's in the works too, or is
Yes,
it?
there
Oh,
is.
okay.
There is a newsletter, and if you go to the website, you can subscribe to the newsletter. And
Oh,
mainly,
great.
it usually is an index of. We could use to. I like the way that you're talking about it, Justin. Actually, we won't copy you, but I like what you're saying. But it ends up being sort of the news of what's going on in the database, and then also other key content that's shown up. That tends
People,
to be major.
I think
We
people
wanna
forget
highlight
just
where this thing
people
goes.
forget how just that there is still people out there that are not on social media all the time and reading posts, and
Yep.
there
Some
are
people
people
will
that get a lot of value from having a once a month or every 2 weeks or whatever, something they can sit down and read on a Sunday afternoon or whatever, and catch up, right? And then they're done, and then they wait for the next one, and that's it. We're kind of caught up, I think, in today's fast-paced world, and forget about a good chunk of people that are actually probably very influential that are still traditional readers.
Or staying probably.
Yeah, I think there's a marketing company that was saying like you need a phone number on your website because the people with the money are still expecting a phone call. They're not on Twitter.
Yeah, recorded.
So, but anyway, we're kind of running out of time here. Unless there's anything else from, I guess, Eurydice. There's some gRPC implementation questions.
Yeah, we were talking about Elixir. Yeah, I want to have the opportunity, Dave, to like give a huge shout out to people in the Slack channel in DDD, because I've been asking like questions about event store itself and trying to understand event store DB, how to implement it to help me to understand all the structure on top of that. And the people in that Slack channel have been doing an amazing job on that. Between the patient and taking the time to educate me and stuff like that, it definitely seems that the people there are trying to have a long-term thinking and embrace the community. I just want to make sure that, Dave, you have the opportunity to please give them the platform, the opportunity to keep doing that, because it definitely will pay off in the long term.
We're definitely going to have a lot of them here, Eurydice, on the podcast for sure. And
thank you, Eurydice. I can almost not overstate how pleased I am to hear that. I felt like there was my personal opinion coming in only a few years ago into the community was that it was kind of a scary place, that there was risk if you came in as not knowing very much, that you were going to get kind of pounced on by the community a bit. And it wasn't a safe place. And if you know, a lot of you probably don't know Matt McLaughlin very well, but he's our head of dev advocacy, but he's one of the moderators of the DDD Secure Us ES list. And he's just one of the coolest guys, laid back Northern Englander, and super supportive. And he's really a lot of that character, I think, not just him, there's others on the team. That's what's happened, is that I see it becoming more and more of a supportive community. And that's what I hope. I'm hoping Event Sourcing World can be that type of kind of nurturing community, and less maybe the Einstein kind of.
That's you hit the nail on the head there. I think that being elitist is not helping anyone.
It's
and one of I always wanted to be the other side of the arguments. Of obviously Greg needed to lay the foundation work by needing to challenge the smart CTOs out there and to do those battles, and he's got the character for it and all that. But I think it's dangerous to assume that you need to follow in those footsteps, and I certainly took the approach of the opposite. No, the other side that needs to be addressed, where you need to show you're human, and no one is going to appreciate you if you try and act smarter than them. So you have to show event sourcing from a layman's terms all the time. The whole idea of talking about information streams and facts. I'm purposefully not using terms from different disciplines so that people can relate to it and understand what's going on. So now that we're getting, the community really building up some information and articles around these concepts, I think hopefully as you accept more writing from more people, and same with our newsletter and your newsletter, that level of communication will be established, and there won't be what you said, being afraid to drop into that initial CQRS forum that, popped up in 2008 or 2007, whenever it was. Everything had to do with, how the database works, and very intimidating topics and mathematics and all that. And, the other opposite side of that is that, look, we had information systems a long time ago. They actually worked the way Event Store works. This is not rocket science. It's doing something very simple, but very critical in a way that you can deploy easily and now host in the cloud easily and have all those things. So it's a good point that Eurydice brings up, is that there's a lot of community members that are out there to help you, and it's not this scary thing about moving to a new way of thinking. In fact, like I said before, the fact that you need to forget some of the complex stuff is the hard part, and so that should be encouraging to people that are new to event sourcing. And as you said, people that have been just fresh out of at Line Data, that were fresh out of university, they had a much easier time, surprise, than the people that had a ton of experience. That experience was actually working against them. So it should really give people a real incentive to go and look at event sourcing and just see how easy it is to run Event Store DB as an executable, and it opens up a port and you do a simple curl command that you copy paste from the internet and you have a result. There's nothing to set up. You're pretty much done at that point.
I was about to reemphasize that real quick, because I do remember how I felt when I joined the Slack channel. It's intimidating for me to be such a young programmer and be bothering older people that may say, here we go again, I have to explain this. But finding out that was completely opposite to that, where these really senior people were there kind of look, I'm going to help you out, and this is how, that has been unique from my perspective, because that allowed me to take advantage of you all, and eventually I can be that person who help all the juniors, and the older people could focus on something else. But it's important to have that space where most people are not afraid of asking yet the same question that may be basic, but not for people like me. And that's been amazing. I'm really grateful for that, especially in the Event Store Slack channel.
Yeah, but it's kind of interesting to have that as leading a way of selling a product. No, our product is incredibly simple. That's what makes it good, because to get things to be simple is really hard. It's really if you can say that I just need ordered storage, that I have guaranteed rights, and then everything else is secondary, right? And as soon as you have that moment of enlightenment, you're like, oh, you shed all this stuff off your back that was gnawing at you, right? Just that approach, and how to have a tool that supports that way of thinking is incredibly awesome. So I'm super happy that for we're going on our 6th year, if you can imagine, Dave. Wow. But that whole time, our default is Event Store DB for all projects, and we certainly look forward to doing more in the cloud now with some of our other clients, and continue on looking forward to all the different features you're talking about as soon as they drop, multi-tenancy, tiered storage. Really exciting to hear that those things are on the plate and coming out soon. And so I guess we're going to end it here. Anything else, Dave, you want to add to closing remarks? Or
I just want to thank you for the opportunity, and also for the contribution that you make to the industry and to the event sourcing space. Demystifying this is, as you mentioned, I think one of the key things and you've been an incredible part of that. So thanks for that. And let's keep doing this occasionally. I'm proud to be on episode 3 of the Event Driven podcast.
Yeah, well, there'll be lots more. There certainly will be at least 50 or 40 some odd. Plan to do one every week, so there'll be a lot. There'll be a lot of material for people to go through, and of course the meetup is there. I really appreciate your kind words. It's a lot of work, like Eurydice says, to keep people educated, and people that want to learn, to support them. And to support our clients and run a business around it. It's a lot of work, so I appreciate your kind words. And if people are interested in Event Store DB, they can just go to eventstore.com, download something locally, and get going really, really quickly. Show it to your boss. Show them that it runs in the 3 major cloud providers, start on those to plan that if they're going to do an approach to information that I think really treats information with respect, adds traceability, adds scalability. I mean, we're scaling stuff from startups to Fortune 500s, and our state transitions are the same. Our infrastructure is the thing that easily kind of transforms, and Event Store is part of that, a core part of that equation, and we continue to look at it. So, Dave, thank you very much. I know you're busy, as we all are during these times, so highly appreciate your time. And we'll be back tomorrow with the meetup, with some more Event Store client talk. So thank you everyone for joining us. Look forward to doing another episode next week. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks,
and
everyone.
one more thing, how do you get hold of you if someone wants to talk to you specifically about some of your history?
I'm on Twitter. Twitter's probably the best way.
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably the best way.
At Dave Remy, DAVEREMY on Twitter. Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you so much again. Have a wonderful day.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. That was a good one.
Yeah, that's really good.
So,
Yeah.
we're